You are listening to the Unslaved Podcast. Please welcome Michael Tessarian and David Whitehead.
Okay, someone asks, what are your thoughts on Freemasonry and the Illuminati?
Well, the Illuminati died out a long time ago, unless you count that fake website that occasionally posts spam around, oh, you can join the Illuminati and become a millionaire. As far as the Freemasons, I've read some Freemason literature, and it's actually pretty boring, honestly. It's a gentleman's club. I read something the other day. Somebody was posting about how the Shriners actually would drink a college frat under the table, and they got totally wasted and would do crazy things and were terrible guests at a hotel or something. If you read the actual Masonic...
Welcome everybody to the show. We're going to be talking today about some of the stuff going on in that clip. And Michael, you wanted to have that play to sort of highlight the overall mentality that a lot of people still have about this group known as the Illuminati. The Illuminati has become sort of this very conspicuous, out there, fringe kind of subject, but it's going more into the mainstream. And a lot of people think, A, it never existed. If it ever did, it was just some kind of high-level gentleman's club or something like that. And then if it did exist, it died out, and there's no influence in the world today by these types of clandestine secret societies like the Illuminati. So give us your first thoughts on that clip.
Yeah, well, it's almost mind-numbing, the level of bollocks. You know, these people come in on the last bus into this movement, and straight away they start pissing on the reputation of all the people that created the very scaffolding and foundations of the movement that they claim to be in, you know, as they come and pick crumbs off the table. I mean, you've heard of twerking, but I bet you haven't heard of verbal twerking. Well, you just heard some. I mean, this is beyond bollocks, you know, and this was excusable before 9/11, when, you know, the movement was shaky, and it was very much an underground movement, this whole thing, right? But it's pure ignorance now, and it's indicative of only two kinds of people. Either you're pig ignorant, or you're a fucking agent, a fifth columnist. That's, and I'm putting my listeners on alert, because you know as well as I do that you hear a lot of this now, this instant knee-jerk rebuttal of the existence of the Illuminati and the power of Freemasonry and whatever, you know, and it's unacceptable. So I'm putting my listeners on alert to be aware of this, and to be aware that either you're dealing with pig ignorance, which is bad but not necessarily fatal, or you're dealing with infiltration and fifth column, you know, activity, which is fatal. And believe me, this movement has been in the last few years mightily infiltrated with all sorts of agents, socialist agents and leftist agents, communist agents, and even secret society agents. So one has to beware, you know. But again, even anyone who's followed this conscientiously, this movement, you know, where we've been exposing groups like this, you know, the Gary Allens and all sorts of prestigious people, even Charles Lindbergh Sr. and stuff, and so many others I could mention. Obviously, there are going to be forces out there who tell you that the Illuminati doesn't exist. Yeah, like they're agents. So there you are, right? But the main thing to realize, though, you know, let's imagine for a moment that you'd actually be swayed by some nincompoop like that. Well, royal families, which have long dynasties, still exist. The Vatican, probably one of the most corrupt organizations, and has hundreds of satellite miscellaneous orders around it in Vatican City and elsewhere. These papal orders, and chivalric and equestrian orders, all exist today. Ancient ones in Spain and Portugal, even in Hungary, they all still exist. The Knights of Malta, right, who used to be the Knights Hospitallers, they still exist. They sit on the United Nations representing a nation. The Cistercian order, which is the monastic wing of the Templars, still exists. That existed from the 10th century. The Illuminati is only from the 18th. 10th century still exists. 18th century couldn't possibly exist. Time for suicide. Livery companies in London alone, just take them in London, not Glasgow, not Manchester, not Liverpool, just go to livery companies. These are sort of guilds, but they're very equestrian, they're very chivalric. Hundreds of them still exist in one form or another. The College of Cardinals, which is so powerful, it defies imagination, still exists. So if you went to anyone from the East, say in somebody from India who knew about Eastern, secret societies and exotic religions, they'd tell you that thousands of those groups, like the Hindus, like the Jains, and many others I could mention, all still exist. Even if you go to the Far East, a lot of the old religions and old societies still exist. They would look at you because you're Western and go, of course you think these things are gone because you're from a Western mentality. Have you any idea how episodic you are, how news headline friendly you people are? Your concept of the movement of time, especially when it comes to secret orders, is so utterly frivolous and trivial. That's why you people in the West are like that. And you can't understand how these royal families and secret societies work. They're hoary with age. Time doesn't move for them in the same way, you see. So yeah, but you see, again, my blood gets up when I see that the great Ed Griffin and Eustace Mullins and those people, and if we have some slides, if we could just head straight to the first one there, Ryan, please. You'll see what I mean. And this is just a short list. Sorry, go back one. Go to the first one. Yeah. You'll see what I mean. Yuri Lina at the top of the list, but you've got Dr. John Coleman. These are eminent people. Some of them were on the hit lists of the KGB. Professor Anthony Sutton, right? Senior academics, Professor Carol Quigley, Senator Gary Allen, generals and captains, Smedley Butler, James Grice, Guy Carr, the great Jim Marsh, who sadly passed away this year, and then Robert Welsh. You see, and that's just a tiny short list. That does not include the Manly Palmers Halls and the David Ovesons, who've studied the architecture of several cities in the, in America. That all seems to be contemporary. Those alignments were done in recent history. The founding of America is recent in history, really recent. But all of that Masonic stuff, that's a drinking man's club that has no power. What about the great Avram Manhattan? So great, didn't even want to bother even putting his name there amongst the others, as great as they are. You're going to tell me that this guy is under some illusion? The man of so eminent, the great Baron himself? But as I say, just go back to what we know from your Manly Palmer Hall types and their David Ovesons, the extraordinary design, the city design, not just of Washington, but Philadelphia and Cologne and Paris, right? Go back to your Henry Fords. Wasn't he a great industrialist, a great man? What about, Charles Lindbergh Sr., father of the aviation genius, right? He spoke about it. Harvard deans like Willard have spoken about it. So the flabbergasting ignorance, you see, of these deniers and the scoffers is just phenomenal to me. And it makes me wonder who they are. But also it reveals basically the basic state of decay, that we're dealing with. And you'll notice that on that list, a very, very, very short list I put there, there's no nutters on there. There's no conspiracy nuts on there. So why would somebody want to debunk the existence of the Illuminati or the power of the Freemasons and the Shriners and what have you? It's absolutely perfidious. And we should, for our viewers, of course, we'll have to revisit it one more time. Eastern Illuminati wasn't enough. Priesthood of the Elites wasn't enough. And all the years of work that I've done on the female Illuminati, again, doesn't seem to be enough. These people on the last bus in, don't have to walk over the broken glass, that these greats who put their life on the line. I'm talking about people like your Eustace Mullins who never earned a dime from the books that they wrote. And many other scholars who put their lives on the line by doing what they did. They faced the ridicule of the world. How dare you piss on their legacy? You don't know half what they knew. And you come in on the last bus into a movement that has struggled in its birth pangs. And then, since 9/11, as I say, there hasn't been, we win arguments hands down. Since 9/11, there can be nobody who's rational and conscientious who can doubt that there are conspiracies in this world. So to have somebody who's technically within this community or suddenly has appeared in the photograph from God knows where, suddenly pissing on it in order to establish whatever their point is unacceptable and has to be dealt with. Otherwise, we're amiss. If you go to the next slide, you'll see something interesting. Here's a book from 1790. It's just one I can mention, Proofs of a Conspiracy. And in this book, it was a man, a professor, a Scottish professor, who's actually John Robinson, the guy who wrote the book, wrote it because he was approached by the Illuminati. Now, you think 1790 is a long time ago, but it wasn't. That's just the end of, that's just the end of the 18th century. He's approached And he said that a lot of professors like myself were approached. It's very similar to what Anthony Sutton's testimony is. And he's in the 20th century. He's in the 1960s, was approached by the Skull and Bones. That's a wing of the Illuminati, right? But this is already reprising what had happened to John Robinson in the 18th century. And if you go to the next slide, the book also features the story of the anti-Masons, right? And the death and the murder of William Morgan. So people are dying to expose this group. Right? They're actually dying. They're being murdered by these groups in order to keep them quiet, because when they refuse to join and then go around publicizing the existence of this order, you know, they end up dead. So this is a very active order, all right. It's a well-known secret society, and there's many people who've studied it know that they still exist. The point I'd like to ask is, when those people, right, tell us that they don't exist, give us some proof of that. Where did you hear that? Where did you find that out? Because it's untrue. We go to the next one there. You'll see that another question gets begged. If these Masons and Illuminati are not around, then what is the reason of late that there's been such a prevalence of the symbolism of Masonry, right? I mean, give me even a good guess. Okay, on one level, it looks like a fashion statement, but we know it's a lot more than just that. Now, if you're wearing a symbol of the Freemason order, or you're making these gestures, isn't it likely that you are a member of that order? I mean, that's just the simplest, you know, it's like the simplest explanation is usually the right one. And I agree that if the answer for a thing gets too complicated, it's probably not as true. Doesn't mean it's not true, but it's more likely that it's not true. But if it's a simple, straight up statement that lots of these actors and people tell you that they're members, and then this whole display of Masonic symbolism is coming from people who are belonging to the movement or are manipulated by others who are. Now, if you see, this has only become aware of people recently, but if you studied cosmetics symbolism, alcohol symbolism, cigarette symbolism, ad copy in general, and certainly other fashion statements in general, it goes back to the 60s and 70s that this Masonic checkerboard stuff and all's been used. This is just this latest interplay, and it's a little bit more in focus. But people like me have been studying this for over 30 years. So, you know, we've got to prove to ourselves that we're not lapsing into ignorance here, listening to toadies like this. Whistleblowers have been speaking the truth at high cost to themselves, high cost academics. Right? So I'm asking the question, if Masonry is a dead horse and has no more power, why the prevalence of not just Masonic, but full-blown Illuminati symbolism in the media? You can't just dismiss these things without giving me an account of why that is. Even your best guess will be, accepted at that point. Go to the next one.
Before we go to that slide, Michael, I was just thinking about what you're saying about the fact that a lot of people today that are just coming into this information, they're hearing a lot of opinions about it, whether they're hearing the opinion that these types of organizations don't exist or that they don't have any power, or that it's all made up, or whether they're hearing, okay, no, they do exist, but it's not the royals, it's not the Catholic Church, it's the Jews, or it's this group, or it's this group, or it's that group. And there becomes a lot of argumentation about the real who's who. And I feel like that word Illuminati is just like this big basket that everybody throws everything into. And we forget that there actually was an organization called the Bavarian Illuminati. It was actually, and it was talking about this illuminist principle, which you could call Luciferian, because Lucifer is just talking about light, right? And it's the manipulation of light, as you've talked about before. Even in Christianity, they have a bastardized version of that term, Lucifer and Satan, and there's a lot of misunderstanding there. So the same way that we see fighting amongst people of different religious groups or different philosophies or different political parties, we see fighting amongst researchers that are looking into this. And that's, I guess, to be expected, because we're on the trail of criminal history. So these criminals, as much as they like to put their gang signs out and we have these evidences, they don't want to be discovered, really, or only maybe to a certain degree do they want to have their presence known.